Welcome to the workbench. Today we're going over everything you need to know about tubeless tires. Okay, so we're going to need a few tools to get started. Some of these tools you might have and others you might consider getting simply because they make the process a little easier. I'll identify which ones are mandatory and which ones are good to have. So first off, we have your basic set of tire levers. These are definitely mandatory, but I think most of us have one of these, or at least a pair of these. The next tool is definitely a nice to have. This is, I guess, an enhanced tire lever. This uses a pivoting action to pull the tire onto the rim of the wheel. I'll show you how to use this. So while optional, I definitely recommend it. You are also going to need a valve core remover. Next, another optional piece of gear is a pair of plastic pliers. I found these in Japan, but you can also get these all over the internet. And basically they're your standard pliers, but they have some plastic or polyurethane lining inside. So I'll show you what this is used for later. This is not mandatory, again, a nice to have. The next is a sealant syringe. While there are methods of putting sealant into the tire without one of these, I think that this method is probably a lot easier and definitely a lot cleaner. So I'll be showing you how to use one of these in the process that we're gonna go over. If you don't have one, you can use an alternate method. The next thing you'll need is a means of both seating and inflating the tire once it's on the rim. Now this is typically done in one of two ways. The first way is with a specialized floor pump that has a canister attached to it. You may have seen some of these. What it does is it allows you to build up pressure in that canister and then release all the air at once. The other method is with an air compressor, and we'll be using that method today. So I have an air pressure regulator here. This one's from Park Tools, and it's fitted with a Presta valve in the back. So you also need a few supplies. First is your favorite tire sealant. Next, you'll need some tubeless tape, but this is only if the rim that you're going to be using was not pre-taped from the factory. The next thing you'll need is a set of tubeless valves. Now these usually come with the wheels if they're tubeless ready wheels, but they're also available from third-party providers. The one thing to keep in mind is that depending on the manufacturer, the base of these valves can vary. So as you can see, you've got one here with an arched profile and then one with this kind of cone-shaped profile. Now both of these can work, but you probably want one that fits as tightly as possible to the inside profile of your wheel. And finally, of course, you'll need a pair of tubeless ready wheels and tubeless ready tires. Before we move on, I think it's important to mention that there are actually two different types of rim profiles out there. You may have heard of both hooked and hookless designs. Now, depending on who you talk to, some people love and some people hate hookless rim designs. Now, what hookless is that it removes the hooked portion of the rim profile that typically holds the tire bead in place. Now, removing that might sound like a bad idea, but if the right tire is used, it actually provides a more seamless transition from the face of the rim to the tire itself. That results in a more aerodynamic transition. Now, the downside of hookless rims is that you really do need to spec the right type of tire, both in size, and they have to be hookless compatible. Now, on the flip side, hooked rims have a less seamless transition between the wheel and the tire. But a lot of people don't think that that's such a big deal. And the advantage gained is that you have a little more safety as far as that tire staying on there. And you have a lot more versatility because you can use a wider range of tires. One of the first things that we need to do when it comes to installation is, of course, understand the general concept of what we're trying to do. So if we take a look at our wheel here, we obviously have our spokes going from the center of the wheel out into the rim. And if you've ever seen the inside of a rim, you'll know that there are some spoke holes. And what we're gonna need to do is seal up those holes to create an airtight chamber between the rim and the tire itself. We've also got, of course, a big hole that goes from the inside of the rim all the way to the outside here, and that's of course for the valve stem. So we'll need to adjust that as well. Now to seal up those spoke holes, we'll need to use rim tape. As I mentioned earlier, there are some wheels that come with this rim tape pre-installed from the factory. And to be honest, that's just the best option because they're gonna do a much better job at taping, certainly than I would. So if you do need to install your own rim tape, one of the first things you're gonna need to do is to make sure your wheel is clean. So I have some isopropyl alcohol here, and I'm just gonna take a shop rag and I'm gonna clean the inside of the rim. When we start this process, we need to start with the valve stem hole, which is right here. So we want to take one hole to either side of the valve stem and then go halfway between that hole and the next hole. That makes sense. So we're going to start our tape here and work our way past the valve stem hole, go all the way around. And then when we come back, we're going to go past it again and overlap this way. So our start is here and our end is here. So we're going to start with getting that tape, and we want to get it all the way down there. So we're going to pull this and center it. We want to use our thumb here to really work that tape down into the center of the rim, to the deepest part of the rim. Now keep in mind the goal here is that we want to seal up all of those little spoke holes as we go. Okay, so we're nearing our valve stem again. And as you can see by this sticker here, the valve stem is actually going to be right here. So we're going to take this tape and go all the way past this next spoke and right here, and that's where we're going to end. Okay, and we can just cut that right there. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this plastic tire lever and I'm just going to use it to braid down the edges. Now be careful because in certain areas where you don't have the tape all the way flush, if you press too hard with this, you could end up puncturing the tape. That's the last thing we want to do. So I'm really just using this to kind of gently push down the edges here. Okay, and then I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to insert the valve stem. You can actually just push straight through the tape, and what that's going to do is it's going to create an airtight seal because that tape is going to kind of stretch around the stem. So what you don't want to do is create a big hole that's really loose and then have this stem going through. That's not really going to help you as far as creating an airtight seal. Now, if you find it a little hard to push this through, you can use a little pick to create a small hole for you. And we're going to do that by just pushing that in. Again, very tiny hole just to help us get started. And then we're going to push that all the way through there. One thing to take note of is that this profile here needs to be oriented in the proper position to create that airtight seal. We're going to push that all the way in there. Next, we'll need to put the collar on. So we can hand thread that and get it as tight as we possibly can with our fingers. But this is where the plastic pliers are going to come into play. So if you do have a pair of these, this can give you just a little bit of extra leverage to tighten this up. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is install the tire. So we've got our GP5000 STR. Just gonna unravel this thing. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start by putting on one side of the bead. Into the rim here. So we're putting that right in the center channel at the deepest point of the rim itself. And pulling my way back to the end here, keeping tension. And then when I get to the end, I'm going to use my enhanced tire lever here, and it's going to hook on to the edge here of this rim. And we're going to pull the tire back over. All right. And we now have one side of the bead installed on the rim. Again, we have it right in the middle channel, and that's exactly where we want it. If it were more on the outside, we would definitely be having problems getting this tire stretched over it. So by keeping it down in the center channel, that gives us the most, I guess, tire excess so that we can actually stretch this over the rim. So we're gonna do the same process now with the other bead. We're gonna pull it inside and kind of drop it in the middle here, just the same way we did with the other one. When we get to the valve over here, we're gonna have it just go around the outside of the valve. So right here, the tire is going around the outside of the valve. Okay, and then we're gonna continue on. Okay, and I'm gonna keep dropping it in the center and pulling it towards me. Okay, and I'm gonna just double check to make sure I'm right there in the center. And then we're gonna use the tire lever here to start pulling this in. So GP5000s are definitely one of the tighter tires that you can put on an Envy wheel. But part of that trade-off is because of the hookless rim design. So now that we've got the tire on, the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna seat the tire. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna fill the tire with air here, and the hope is that the beads on the tire will pop into place. It's gonna be a pretty loud process. We do expect a lot of air leakage just because there's no sealant in the tire, but as long as we can get the tire to seat, we're in good shape. So let's give it a try. Gonna open up the valve stem here. Okay, I've got my thumb kind of holding down the bead right next to the valve to help try to create that seal right around the valve. Okay, so those popping noises mean that the tire is actually seated. And I'm just gonna use my plastic pliers here just to help tighten this valve collar. So that's looking good. So next we're gonna take the valve core out, and that'll allow us to put some sealant in. Okay, so standing the tire up, we're just gonna let all the rest of that air out. And we're gonna take valve core remover. Okay, next we're gonna take our sealant and our sealant syringe here. So one of the great things about this syringe is that we've got a measurement on here, and we wanna put about 2 ounces in this 28mm tire. I'm gonna thread this right onto the valve stem here. Okay, and I'm gonna just tilt this up a little. And I'm gonna push all that fluid in. And I'm just gonna use my rag underneath here, or my wipe right underneath, because as I pull this out, I'm gonna have a little bit of leak. And then we're gonna put our valve core back in. We'll just screw that back. All right, and now we can re-inflate this, and hopefully the sealant will help fill up some of those voids that are causing the air to leak out. One thing that I do recommend is when you re-inflate this, you want to do it with the valve either to the side or to the top, but not when it's in this 6 o'clock position. And the reason for that is if there is any splattering, all the fluid is right at the bottom of this wheel right now. So if we push a lot of air right here, it could start spilling out over here. So we definitely want to avoid that. So we're just gonna put it to the 3 o'clock position here, and we'll start inflating. Okay. And I'm gonna close that up, and then immediately we're gonna move that around. And so what we're doing is we're circulating the liquid to kind of get into all those little nooks and crannies that are not totally sealed. And that sealant's gonna help plug up those tiny little holes. And if you're hearing any little air escaping, any hisses, hopefully as you're doing this, they will disappear. Now, before we move on, one thing I really want to point out, and it is kind of a scary and yet important thing, is that when we put on that rim tape, there is a chance that sometimes air can escape or get through that rim tape and into this cavity here. Now, this cavity is internal to the rim itself, and it is not part of the pressurized air chamber. However, if pressurized air starts getting into this chamber, you could have a rim that actually gets to the point of exploding, which is a scary thing to think about. So certain manufacturers have built-in precautions. Now, these NV wheels are not terribly problematic in my experience. The NV collar has little holes on the sides of it that allow pressure to escape this cavity but not the pressurized tire cavity. So we haven't seen any issues as far as over pressurizing this internal cavity to the point of explosion or anything like that. But not all wheels have this design. This reserve wheel, for instance, has a different mechanism. If you look closely here, there's a tiny little hole, and this is an air pressure release hole. So again, in the event that this rim tape does not hold and this cavity starts to become pressurized, air can escape through this hole, which is a nice thing to have. So in the event that your wheel does not have a safeguard, it's a good idea to keep a watch on the air pressure as you start inflating your tire. If you start hearing some creaking, you might want to back off on the air pressure and just double check your rim tape. Now, as far as maintenance goes, you will need to top off your wheels from time to time with a little extra sealant. Now, different brands will dry up in different intervals, so you kind of need to check to see what's going on with your wheel every so often. So what I like to do is I give it a little spin while it's on a rack, and if I can hear the liquid swishing around inside, that's usually a good sign that the sealant is still in good shape. Now, if you don't hear anything, it's probably time to top it off. Additionally, if you have any kind of puncture out on the road while you're riding, you'll need to add a little bit more sealant when you get back home. So that about wraps up the tubeless installation. Hopefully you found this video helpful. Hit that subscribe button if you did, and we'll see you on the next one.